Okay, you ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1, go. This is Saswa, a podcast about Bigfoot. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Seth Breedlove. I'm joined tonight by my pal, Mark Matsky.
Greetings from Southeast Ohio.
And we are returning to you with a kind of a catch-up episode, something a little different from the norm. It is still a very busy time for both of us. It's a huge week for Mark, actually. I just found out. It is G-Fest,
Yes.
which is this massive Godzilla-themed con, correct?
That is correct. The largest gathering of Godzilla fans in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts this Thursday.
Didn't you do like panels and stuff last week?
I've done
last year?
panels before,
Mhm.
and this year I am once again shepherding the programming for kids at
Mhm.
G-Fest. And I'm also on a panel about music from the Godzilla films.
Wow. that is intense. So how do you talk about Godzilla music for like what is it? Like a 2-hour panel, an hour?
Oh, heavens no. It's like 45, 50 minutes.
Okay.
And well, I mean, in this case, I got drafted for this panel because we'll actually be doing some a cappella singing
Oh wow.
of Akira Ifukube's music, and it's should be pretty fun and wacky.
Yeah. Tempted to have you give us a sample while we're here. But so this past week we had the Minerva Monster screening at the Canton Palace Theater in Canton, and you came up, Mark.
Yeah.
And we should have recorded. I wish we could have recorded something while you were up. I didn't even think of it for some reason. But a couple things too before I get to that. If you notice my volume going up and down or whatever, my apologies. I am going to try and get it fixed before we record the next episode, but as of right now, Google's just doing whatever it wants, seemingly. So it is taking control of my recording program, and it's literally even like I'm sitting here holding my thumb on the button, like trying to adjust the volume, and it's still taking control of it somehow. So
It's a gremlin.
yeah, it's like Skynet or something. Like Google is in control of my computer. So yeah, I the Canton Palace Theater screening, which is like this amazing movie theater in downtown Canton, which is a town pretty close to where I grew up. And the Palace is one of the only remaining movie houses in America that was designed by this specific architect. I can't remember the guy's name or anything, but there was apparently a whole slew of these movie palaces at one time, and now there's only a few of them. I think the Akron Civic Center is comparable to this. Personally, I kind of prefer the palace, but I'm biased. But we got to show the movie there. You came up, Andy came up, Shannon LeGros came up. It was almost like a reunion in a way, because it was a lot of us, the whole Small Town Monsters crew, and you were there, and just a really cool turnout, though. They did tell us that this was like the biggest turnout they had for an event on a Thursday night, which is their art film night, which I get a kick out of.
I think that's great. Yeah,
it
is
being
an art film, right?
An art film. It was like their biggest
Merchant Ivory and
right.
Seth Breedlove.
Yeah, it's like a Spike Jones movie. That's why Truffaut. So yeah, biggest, like one of their biggest turnouts in ages, I guess. So we had a few hundred people, well, 200 and some people, possibly 300. I heard so many different numbers, and we managed to get that kind of a turnout in only, I think we had like a little over 2 weeks to kind of promote the movie. And again, like our marketing budget is non-existent, so it was impressive to me. We were grassroots on this thing. We printed posters and hung them all over town, and I managed to get one radio interview going into it. But yeah, a really cool turnout. And there's a little video I put online, and you can see Mark and Andy and myself in that video. But we did get to do like a Q&A with the sheriff and Barbara, so that was really cool. So
that was great. I really liked that part of it too.
Yeah, and then we did dinner afterward with you guys, and yeah, it was awesome. I don't know if people know this, but like Mark lives what 2 hours from me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like Mark and I really only see each other at the typically like we see each other at the conference, obviously, but we've probably only hung out now like 5 times maybe.
Right. 5 times, I think, is
Yeah.
correct.
So it's a hoof if we want to hang out, but we still have to do something at some point this summer because I still want to do this like Sasquatch video show. It's still something I want to try to do. So we have letters, and that is going to be the topic of this week's show. We're not going to really get into anything too crazy. No huge single topic.
Philosophical
Yeah, nothing
diatribes.
philosophical. No interviews this week. Nothing. I was trying originally. This like June was supposed to be our big interview month, and it hasn't happened. We have one interview, and I think we interviewed Brian and Daryl during May, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe that was June. I don't remember. All right, this is July now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we got a message on Facebook from Tracy Halderman, and he said this question is meant mainly for Seth. I would like to know your opinion on the eyewitness accounts of thousands of people. I find it all but impossible to believe that all of them were either lying, misidentifying, delusional, or drunk / on drugs. I've never seen a Bigfoot, but the testimonies of many credible witnesses, such as soldiers, police officers, forest workers, hunters, and even children, convinced me that something was going on that defied a typical explanation. As a skeptic, I would like to know how you view all of these accounts and stories, what with many being full view daytime sightings. I love your podcast and the Minerva Monster documentary that you directed, and respect your skepticism and fairness to the subject. Please feel free to answer this question on Sasquatch if you wish to. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Tracy, and thanks for the compliment on Minerva as well. And Mark, I think you should answer this as well because we're actually both pretty skeptical. But we just talked a little bit about this during the Q&A the other day. The thing that keeps me involved in the subject and keeps me thinking there's something going on is the eyewitness testimony, because I don't have an answer for a lot of those. Not a lot, but a handful of those. And the like you said, the credible witnesses especially make me question things. So I always go back to the NAWAC, and it's not just because I'm a member of the group, but like the guys that are in the NAWAC, a lot of those dudes are really legit, like former military or law enforcement, that kind of stuff, and very intelligent people in that organization. Kathy and Bob Strain spring to mind, and they've both seen something, and it's almost impossible for me to say, well, they're crazy, or Brian Brown's crazy, or they're misidentifying a black bear. That rain of rocks that came off the hill was redneck deliverance folk. But the problem for me is, I get it. Like, eyewitness testimony is great and everything, but like at the end of the day, why don't we have a body? Why don't we have photographic evidence? Why don't we have something really concrete? We have a lot of evidence. We don't have proof of any kind, in my opinion. But like you said, the stories and the eyewitness testimony that is what keeps me around. I mean, that's what keeps me thinking maybe there is something to all of this. And so yeah, I'm like you. I'm skeptical, but I would never say I'm like just totally skeptical to the possibility of these things existing. I think there's definitely something going on. I don't know what it is. I don't know if what's going on is a giant bipedal ape. That seems to be what the evidence suggests, and that seems to be what the bulk of the eyewitness reports to me are suggesting. But at the end of the day, I just don't know, if that's the explanation we have. I don't know. Mark, chime in.
With the eyewitness account issue, I mean, I kind of follow along the same lines as you. They're the thing that makes it compelling, makes the issue interesting, is hearing these, and the ones that Tracy talks about, full daytime sightings, not like a shadow 500 yards off in the forest, but people seeing things walk right in front of them, raises a lot of questions. So Yeah, that's one side of the coin, is that the stories that people tell, the accounts that they tell, they beg for an explanation. Now, the other side, the flip side, is that even eyewitness testimony is notoriously fallible. There's people can be sure that they have certain memories, but after that message came through, I did a little researching on eyewitness testimony and memory, and there's a lot of literature out there that talks about how memories can be planted in people, and I'm not talking about like CIA stuff happening with chemicals and things. I'm just mean you can convince somebody that they had an experience just if the person that they trust is telling them, when you were 5 or 6 years old, you fell in the pond, and you may not remember that, but if they tell you that enough, it will become something that you believe that you experienced. And I don't know how that necessarily applies to Bigfoot accounts, but I do think that as much as I do feel like eyewitness testimony is compelling, and we probably wouldn't be talking about Bigfoot if it weren't for eyewitness testimony, to just say all this eyewitness, even the daytime sightings, just show that there is something out there. Well, I don't know that that's true. Or if, assuming that they did see something, we still don't have a clear idea of what that is. And a lot of the skeptical writers that we've talked about, they attempt to answer that question by saying it's a construct of our psyche. I'm not sure I buy that either. I think that came through the episodes that we've done. So, I mean, in the end, we're left with a big question mark. Far more questions than even directions in which to go to get an answer.
Yeah. And that's why, well, I mean, for myself, that's why I'm still in it. That's why it keeps me around. We did get a letter I wanted to mention from Alex, and he said, I noticed that you guys took serious umbrage with one of the skeptical authors declaring all tracks false. What I can't figure out is why. If his premise is that Bigfoot is not a real entity, logically it follows that all tracks are not Bigfoot tracks. I doubt he said they are all faked. I'm sure misidentification is the largest contingent to that, and most all skeptics. On a slight side note, double tap bear tracks really are quite a compelling explanation. Direct register walkers tend to make some strange tracks, but it's not that strange when you know what you're seeing. On a larger side note, Bigfoot as the exaggerated Mega Man makes perfect sense. The argument of, well, how do you explain so many cultures having hairy man legends is actually more proof that there is nothing factual going on. Of course, we have all those legends. It explains why we all see him. We all have to. Without getting into the intricacies of dermal ridges and mid-tarsal breaks, we can keep this simple. I think we likely should. Speak up on that, because you're the one that knows what he's referring to with the book.
Yeah. Well, with all due respect to our listeners, Degling in exposing Bigfoot does in fact make the claim that all track finds are fakes. Now, I would invite him, if he hasn't done so, to take a look at Degling's book, because that is exactly what he says. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't talk about misidentification. He makes the claim that, relative to especially the Pacific Northwest, but not limited to that, all of the clear tracks that have been put forward as bona fide Sasquatch tracks are faked, and that it was a result of sort of a small group of fakers making a lot of fake feet, and then there were actually people unrelated to that small group who decided that sounded like a fun idea, and of their own volition decided to do the same thing. Now, that's all speculation on his part, I'm pretty sure. I mean, based off of Ray Wallace. Once again, we come back to Ray, but that is his contention in this particular book.
Yeah, and the double track bear tracks or double tap bear tracks, I completely agree. I think those account for a lot of quote unquote Bigfoot tracks, especially ones that are never seen by, your footprint quote unquote experts. Like, what's his name? Meldrum. Um, the tracks that are never like looked over by those guys. Um, I think there's probably a huge percentage of them that are double tap bear tracks. I'm almost positive actually. And people say, well, there's no claw marks, blah blah blah. They don't have to have claw marks. I've seen double tap bear tracks that didn't have claw marks. That can go without, you know. So yeah, I agree. I agree with a lot of what he says in this letter. I totally in like without getting into the intricacies of dermal ridges and the whole what's this thing called? No, mid tarsal break. Yeah. Yeah, dermal ridges to me has been pretty conclusively defeated, like in a lot of ways, especially with the the artifacts of track casting being pretty much universally declared to be the reason there are dermal ridges in some of these casts. It sucks because when the dermal ridge thing came out, I remember being like, oh, that's it. Then there's definitely some sort of like this is proof now. Now these casts are proof. If they have dermal ridges, that can't be faked. It's not that they're being faked. It's just an artifact of the casting. So, yeah. We have another letter here. These are great. I really want to get to a point where if you're a listener of the show and you like to, you have something you want to hear us talk about, or you want to talk to us about something, send us in a letter, saswatmail@gmail.com. We'll read it on the show and then discuss it. And maybe we can get to a point where we'll get enough letters that we could do like a listener mailbag episode every month or something. So we got a letter from Bradley. He says, hi, I've been enjoying the show and thought I'd write in response to the last episode on skepticism. I'd consider myself a skeptical optimist, hopeful enough in the quality of something like Sasquatch to maintain interest in the topic and give claims of evidence some of my time, but highly skeptical about the plausibility in the evidence that has been put forth. I'm a professor of biology with my doctorate and training in animal ecology and behavior. This fall, I will be teaching a course on monsters that will largely focus on the Bigfoot phenomenon, albeit as a way to examine a number of issues related to the nature of science, popular culture, etc. I want to take that course. I'll even be employing my students in extracting data from the BFRO sighting report database to perform the first statistical analysis of Bigfoot sightings, hopefully something I can publish in a scientific journal. I had a few thoughts that I'd be curious to hear discussed. There are reports of Bigfoot-type creatures from nearly every state and many countries of the world, including in areas that seem biologically impossible. Most believers seem to admit this, but claim that not every sighting has to be legitimate. My concern is that the believers are willing to discount some sightings due to implausibility, but the more plausible sightings in Washington State, etc., have just as reliable of witness testimony. If mistaken identity or lying or hoaxing can be used as an explanation for a sighting in Central Park, why can't it be used for a sighting in the Sierra Nevada? Is this logically consistent? Let's get into that real quick. I don't know, like I don't have an example in my head of like someone discounting something simply because of a geographical location. If someone sees a Bigfoot in Central Park, I mean, that's like, I'm trying to think of something to compare that to, like something real world to compare that to. It'd be like seeing a grizzly bear in Central Park. Like only a grizzly bear is much more likely because we know they exist. But I would discount that kind of report as well. So I think it probably just comes down to the plausibility, not necessarily. Well, I guess what's the question here, Mark? He's basically saying like if a completely plausible person were to come forward and say I saw a Bigfoot in Central Park, and then you compare that to just as likely candidate saying the same thing in like Washington State, the Central Park person's cast out, but the Washington State person is automatically accepted because it's a plausible witness in a plausible location.
Right. Well, once again, we're talking about eyewitness testimony and some of the inherent problems with it. One of them being that we can't help but having a bias towards the information that we receive, and that touches on two things. One is people that we identify as credible witnesses. If we consider you hear that all the time in Bigfoot studies, such as they are, that this was a credible witness. And that may be true, but I think we'd have to allow for once in a while a non-credible witness could see something real, and a credible witness could lie or conflate something or misidentify. But the way that we work is if we go into a situation trusting the eyewitness source, then we're going to give them a huge benefit of the doubt. And that's a bias. You just have to acknowledge that. And the same holds true then for a location. We have biases about places where we think criteria exist that would make it more plausible or less for a Bigfoot to exist. So that's going to influence how we take that report. And it's really, I think the point in a lot of the stuff that I've seen here just recently says it's really not possible to evaluate a eyewitness report completely objectively, as much as we like to throw that language around.
Sure.
We can't.
Sure.
We just can't.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I agree as someone who just, made this movie with his family, who I constantly say I totally believe, and I do believe that something happened to the Catons. But having said that, it doesn't mean they couldn't be lying or someone couldn't be lying. No, I could be lying when I say that I believe Bigfoot's a possibility. Maybe I'm completely closed off to it, but for whatever reason, I'm telling you that. It's a weird question in a way, because it's hard to answer. Like, I don't know. Some of it's gut, like who you're listening to and all that kind of stuff. And it's also like, if you're interviewing a witness, I don't think a couple of hours with anyone can determine their credibility. I'm sorry. Like, I just don't think it's possible. You gotta and even spending years or, days with someone might not determine their credibility necessarily. It's everyone's fallible. So I don't know. It's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
But I
completely agree with the idea of, you need an awful lot of time in order to determine whether or not somebody is A, credible, and B, telling you the truth, and sometimes those things could contradict each other. Then you're really confused.
This is why I like the work of Ron Schaffner, because he was so incredibly skeptical of witnesses. Like, even witnesses he trusted and liked, he was just very skeptical of all testimony. And I hate to say it, but I think you have to be that way if you're going to get into this stuff and you're going to talk to witnesses, because otherwise you're just going to take everything at face value. And let me say something here, and this isn't, I don't know. So when we get into to talking about, this is how I feel about almost any of these really kind of out there reports, like Bigfoot's coming out of UFOs and stuff like that. Who are the people that are making the claims of, like, the Bigfoot getting out of the UFO? And how closely are they evaluated when the reports are being given about, like, Thunderbird reports and like that? That's why I have such a hard time with the really outlandish cryptid stuff, because I just don't. As someone who does research and investigation myself and talks to people and talks to witnesses, I will never be in a place where I can read some of that stuff and trust the author myself. I just don't get it. It's one of the reasons I love the way Lyle Blackburn approaches the subject. Like, Lizard Man is this very, it's this insane idea, like this lizard creature, but he does such a good job of not only laying out, like, this is what witnesses were seeing, but, like, what are the odds biologically that this thing could exist? And here are some alternative theories as to what this could be, that kind of stuff, instead of just kind of wholesale accepting any eyewitness testimony. This should have been called, like, the eyewitness episode or something.
Yeah.
That's all I'm talking about, like, the psychology of eyewitnesses.
But it's at the center of this subject, really. Without it, I don't think there would be anything to talk about. And I think in the question that you asked, I think one thing that muddies the waters a little bit is the fact that in some of these stranger cases, not all of them, but in a few that I can think of, you have people like state highway patrolmen and other law enforcement officers who are on the scene of weird events and experience them and have no explanation to offer. And so once again, that points at one of the bias points, points at one of the ideas that we've been talking about just now, which is if someone who we don't know from Adam tells us that they saw, a luminescent glow in a field where a UFO was reportedly sighted, we'd probably write them off immediately. But if a state highway patrolman says, "Oh yeah, I was there on the site and there was a glow there that I can't explain," now chances are we're going to take that with a grain of salt because of that person's authority, and we have a tendency to say, well, that's somebody who's trained as a observer and so on and so forth. So we start to tilt more in the direction of accepting,
Sure.
at least their report of that. So it all plays into, who do you trust and why?
Right. Another question. What do you make of the diversity in Bigfoot anatomy? I'm flummoxed by the three-toed prints that are common in the South. No other primates have three toes, and the evolutionary reduction of digits from the typical 5 seems to be always associated with some very particular function. We talked a little bit about this when David was on. What is it? Alligators, crocodiles? We had this problem. Alligators and crocodiles. Crocodigators. They're roaming around the South. A lot of times that is what people are saying is it's a double tap crocodile print. They've discovered that's a thing. And the other big culprit in this situation would be hoaxers. The Boggy Creek tracks are probably faked. I mean, I think that's been established. And the wait, is it the Boggy Creek tracks that are faked, or are those the ones that are misidentified? This is talked about in Lyle's book, I swear to God.
Oh.
I cannot remember.
Go back and see that.
Okay, because the Lizard Man tracks were the same thing, right? 3 toes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that was a hoax? Yes? No?
Well,
we don't know definitively. Okay.
Yeah. And then the point is that they were the 3-toed classic weird print.
Right. And then the Honey Island Swamp Monster is the other one that's like a big, that was the 3-toed track, and that was pretty much definitively proven to be a hoax. Like they found the shoes that were making the tracks and everything. So I think it's down to hoaxes and misidentification myself when it comes to the 3-toed tracks. There aren't enough of them to really make me think. Now there are. I did hear of like 4-toed tracks being found in Ohio, which, I mean, when you get into this, it's like 3-toed, 4-toed, 5-toed, 6-toed Bigfoots. It's bizarre.
Yeah, the 7-toed ones are the ones that really concern me.
Yeah. I actually jumped over one of his questions, which was field biologists like myself spend lots of time in the outdoors, often having to pay attention to subtle details of the environment. For instance, my research has involved countless hours in the woods trying to spot well-camouflaged creatures in the leaf litter. Why do you suppose biologists never find any Bigfoot evidence? And the first thing that jumped on my mind when I read this is, Grover Krantz never saw one, but wasn't he what was he? He was anthropologist? No? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay. The
anatomist or something. Yeah.
Okay. And then let me think. The other thing, what is the guy's name that works with he's been on Les Stroud's stuff and he's always involved with Meldrum, but he's this is embarrassing. He's a famous Bigfoot dude. Older guy. That kind of looks like Krantz.
Oh, John Bindernagel?
Yeah, Bindernagel. Wasn't he a biologist? Something like that.
Yeah.
The other thing that jumps to mind is Alton Higgins, who's with the NAWAC, kind of heads up the NAWAC. If I'm not mistaken, he's a field biologist. So there are people that are involved in that field. I don't know that they've had direct sightings while out there. again, just because you're in out in the outdoors and hiding and all that stuff doesn't necessarily mean your chances for seeing a Bigfoot are automatically increased, because there's hunters who are out there just as much. And you know
Yeah, in the letter, is he talking about evidence? He's like
that's what I couldn't.
evidence in the field because the question becomes, well, what are you looking for? Yeah.
Right.
What's the evidence that would say that this is a Bigfoot versus another creature? I
Why
mean,
do
to
you
the eye,
suppose?
anyway.
Why do you suppose biologists never find any Bigfoot evidence? Is what he's actually saying. So, in my opinion, I think some of them have. And the other thing I would say is that I would imagine a lot of them, if they don't believe Bigfoot exists, they probably just ignored whatever they did find, and say, "Oh, it's a double tap bear track," or
Right. So, I mean, what options do we have outside of tracks,
yeah,
hair,
yeah,
scat? I mean, all that stuff that we're used to talking about. I mean, you'd either, I don't know, pass over it, identify it as something else,
yeah.
or, then there's the hoaxing deal as well.
I think we're gonna wrap up. Thanks to our letter writers so much for writing in, and do write in if you're a listener, and we will try to do one of these mailbag type episodes. Maybe I kind of enjoy doing these.
Yeah.
So, yeah, send them in. And thank you, especially if you're a listener of the show. We reached another milestone. By the time you're listening to this, anyway, we're at like 200,000 total downloads all time, over 55 episodes. So that's pretty cool for our little show. And just thank you to everyone for listening. And if you like the show, just keep sharing and all that stuff. And let's head for another 55 episodes, I guess. All right.